March 1958. The MGM Studios lot in Culver City, California. Gene Kelly was in the middle of choreographing a dance sequence for a television special when someone knocked on the rehearsal studio door. It was Arthur Freed, the legendary producer who'd made Gene a star, and he had a proposition that would either create magic or destroy a friendship that hadn't even started yet. "Gene, I need you to do me a favor," Arthur said, walking into the studio with that particular expression producers get when they're about to ask for something unreasonable. "I've got Sammy Davis Jr. scheduled to appear on your special next week, and he's insisting on doing a dance number with you." Gene stopped mid-step and turned to face Arthur. "Sammy Davis Jr.? The kid from the Will Maston Trio?" "He's not a kid anymore. He's 32 years old, and he's the hottest thing in show business right now. Sold out the Copacabana for 6 weeks straight. The man can sing, dance, play drums, do impressions, and make audiences forget to breathe. And he specifically requested to dance with you." Gene felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. Pride, maybe. Or fear disguised as pride. He was Gene Kelly. He'd revolutionized dance and film. He danced with a cartoon mouse, sung in the rain, and made athleticism look like poetry. He was 45 years old and still considered the best dancer in Hollywood. And now some nightclub performer wanted to share his stage? "What kind of number does he want to do?" Gene asked carefully. Arthur pulled out a cigarette and lit it, taking his time with the answer. "That's the interesting part," he said, and I quote, "Tell Gene Kelly I can outdance him. Tell him I'll prove it on his own show, in front of his own audience, and he'll thank me for it afterward." The rehearsal studio went completely silent. Gene's assistant choreographer, Carol, sucked in a breath. The piano players stopped doodling on the keys. Everyone in the room understood what had just happened. Sammy Davis Jr. had just publicly challenged Gene Kelly. Not requested to dance with him, challenged him. "He said that?" Gene asked quietly. "He said that." Gene walked to the window overlooking the MGM lot, the place that had been his artistic home for 15 years. He could refuse. He could have Arthur call Sammy back and politely decline. He could protect his reputation, maintain his position at the top of the hierarchy, and never risk being shown up by a younger, hungrier performer. Or he could do what every fiber of his competitive Irish soul was screaming at him to do: accept the challenge and remind this upstart exactly why Gene Kelly was Gene Kelly. "Tell him yes," Gene said, turning back to Arthur. "Tell him we'll do a 7-minute duet. No choreographer except me. No safety net. We rehearse for 4 days, we film it in 1 take, and may the best man win." "I was hoping you'd say that. He's already on the lot. Been waiting in my office for 2 hours. "Of course he has," Gene said, and despite his irritation, he felt a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Bring him in. Let's meet this genius who thinks he can outdance Gene Kelly." 10 minutes later, Sammy Davis Jr. walked into the rehearsal studio, and Gene's first thought was, "This man is smaller than I expected, and more dangerous than I imagined." Sammy was 5'6", maybe 130 pounds soaking wet, wearing a sharp suit that probably cost more than Gene's car. But it wasn't his size or his clothes that struck Gene. It was the way he moved. Even just walking across a room, Sammy moved like every step was part of a performance, like his body was always ready to break into rhythm, like stillness was a temporary state he tolerated between dances. "Mr. Kelly," Sammy said, extending his hand, "it's an honor. I've studied every frame of every film you've ever made." "Mr. Davis," Gene replied, shaking his hand firmly, "I've heard you're quite the talent. Arthur tells me you think you can outdance me." Sammy's face split into a grin that was simultaneously charming and absolutely fearless. "I don't think, Mr. Kelly. I know. But here's the thing. I don't want to outdance you to embarrass you. I want to outdance you to push you, because I've got a theory that if we both try to destroy each other for 7 minutes, we'll create something neither of us could create alone." Gene stared at this cocky, brilliant, impossibly confident man and realized something. Sammy wasn't trying to take his crown. He was trying to make them both better. This wasn't a challenge born from disrespect. It was a challenge born from the kind of artistic hunger that Gene recognized because he'd had it himself 20 years ago. "All right," Gene said. "You want to push me? Let's see what you've got. Show me your best step." Sammy didn't hesitate. He launched into a tap combination that was so fast, so complex, so rhythmically sophisticated that Gene's trained eye could barely track it. His feet were a blur. His arms were loose, casual, like the impossibly difficult thing his feet were doing required no effort at all. He threw in a barrel turn, landed it perfectly, and finished with a freeze that was so controlled it looked like someone had paused a film. The studio went silent again, but this time it was the silence of people who'd just witnessed something extraordinary. Carol's mouth was literally hanging open. The piano player had stopped pretending not to watch and was openly staring. Gene felt that uncomfortable feeling in his chest again, and this time he recognized it for what it was: respect mixed with the thrilling terror of finally meeting an equal. "Not bad," Gene said, keeping his voice neutral. "Let me show you how we do it in the movies." He moved to the center of the floor and began to dance. But he wasn't trying to match Sammy's flash and speed. Instead, he did what he did best. He told a story with movement. His dance was slower, more deliberate. Every gesture meaning something. Every step building to the next. He made you feel something. Made you forget you were watching technique, and instead made you believe you were watching emotion made visible. When he finished, Sammy was nodding slowly, that grin even wider. Okay, I see what you're doing. You're playing chess while I'm playing checkers. You're thinking 3 beats ahead, while I'm living in the moment. That's beautiful, man. That's what I need to learn." "And you've got something I need to remember," Gene admitted. "Joy. Pure, unfiltered, infectious joy. I've been so focused on making dance meaningful that I forgot it's also supposed to be fun." They stared at each other for a long moment, and then simultaneously they both laughed. The challenge was still on. The bet was still real. But now, it was something else too. A collaboration between 2 artists who just recognized in each other something rare and worth fighting for. "So here's what I propose," Gene said. "We choreograph this thing together. Every step is negotiated. Every moment is earned. We push each other until we find something neither of us knew we had. And when we're done, whoever wins the audience wins the bet." "And what are we betting?" Sammy asked. "Pride, respect. The right to say, I danced with Gene Kelly, or I danced with Sammy Davis Jr., and mean it." "Deal." They shook hands, and the next 4 days became the most intense artistic collaboration either man had ever experienced. They started by establishing the framework. The song would be "Taking a Chance on Love," upbeat enough to showcase both their styles, but meaningful enough to give the piece emotional weight. The concept: 2 dancers meeting on a street corner, challenging each other, trying to one-up each other, and eventually discovering that together they were better than either could be alone. Day 1 was brutal. They fought over every 8 count. Gene wanted structure, build-up, narrative arc. Sammy wanted spontaneity, surprise, moments that felt dangerous. They'd rehearse a section, realize it wasn't working, scrap it, and start over. 6 hours into rehearsal, they'd completed exactly 45 seconds of choreography. "This is insane," Carol said, watching them argue for the 3rd time about whether a particular spin should be executed on beat 3 or beat 4. "You're going to kill each other before you finish this." "Good," both men said simultaneously, then laughed despite their frustration. Day 2, something started clicking. They began to understand each other's vocabulary. Gene learned to leave space for Sammy's improvisational flourishes. Sammy learned to respect Gene's architectural approach to building a dance. They started finishing each other's sentences, suggesting movements that complemented rather than competed. By day 3, they had 5 minutes choreographed, and it was unlike anything either had created before. It was Gene's storytelling married to Sammy's rhythm. It was ballet meeting tap, meeting jazz, meeting something entirely new. They'd created sequences where they'd mirror each other, then deliberately break the mirror. Moments where they'd compete, trying to top each other's tricks. Then moments where they'd move in perfect unison, like they'd been dance partners for years. "There's a section missing," Sammy said late on day 3, physically exhausted but mentally wired. "Right before the finish. We need something that shows we're not competing anymore, that we've transcended the challenge and found something bigger." Gene nodded, knowing exactly what Sammy meant, but not knowing how to execute it. They sat in silence for 10 minutes, both men thinking, both men searching for that elusive moment that would transform good choreography into transcendent art. "What if," Gene said slowly, "we do the impossible? What if we take your fastest tap combination and my most controlled ballet movement, and we do them simultaneously, side by side, and somehow make them the same thing?" Sammy's eyes went wide. "That's crazy. Tap is percussion, ballet is flow, they're opposite languages." "Exactly. But what if we found the bridge? What if we proved that all dance is the same language, just different dialects?" They worked on that single 30-second sequence for 4 hours straight, Sammy tapping at lightning speed while Gene moved through a series of slow, sustained leg extensions and turns. It shouldn't have worked. By all logic, it should have looked like two people doing completely different dances in the same space. But it worked. Somehow, impossibly, it worked. The contrast made each style look more beautiful. Sammy's speed made Gene's control look even more impressive. Gene's grace made Sammy's power look even more explosive. Together, they were demonstrating the full range of what human bodies could do when music moved through them. Day 4 was for polish and precision. They ran the full 7 minutes 23 times, finding tiny moments to improve, small transitions to smooth out. By the final run-through, they were so in sync that Carol said it looked like they'd been dancing together their whole lives. "Tomorrow we film," Gene said, drenched in sweat, every muscle in his 45-year-old body screaming. "One take, no safety net. You ready?" "I was born ready," Sammy said, equally exhausted but grinning that impossible grin. "But I've got to ask, do you still think you're going to outdance me?" Gene thought about it honestly. "I think we're going to outdance everyone, including ourselves. I think we're about to create something that'll still matter 50 years from now. And I think whoever wins this bet, we both win something bigger." The next day, March 28, 1958, they filmed the number. One camera, one take, 7 minutes that would become legendary in dance history. The footage shows two men at the absolute peak of their powers, pushing each other, challenging each other, and ultimately celebrating each other. You can see the competition in the early sections, each man throwing down combinations designed to intimidate. You can see the moment it shifts from competition to collaboration. Both dancers grinning, both clearly having the time of their lives. And in that final 30 seconds, you can see something transcendent. Sammy's feet moving faster than should be humanly possible, while Gene's body moves with impossible control, and somehow, inexplicably, it looks like one piece of choreography, one artistic statement, one truth expressed by two different instruments. When they finished, the crew erupted in applause. The camera operators were crying. Arthur Freed stood up and said, "That's the greatest thing I've ever filmed, and I filmed Singin' in the Rain." Gene and Sammy stood center stage, breathing hard, looking at each other with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, and deep, mutual respect. "So," Sammy said, "who won?" Gene laughed. "I have absolutely no idea, but I don't think that was ever really the point." The television special aired 6 weeks later. The dance numbers stopped the show. TV critics called it the greatest duet in television history. Dance magazines wrote dissertations analyzing the choreography. Young dancers wore out their VHS tapes rewatching it, trying to learn the steps. But more importantly, it started a friendship that would last 32 years. Gene and Sammy became not just professional colleagues, but genuine friends. They'd call each other with ideas, challenge each other to keep growing, push each other to never settle for good enough when great was possible. In 1985, at a tribute dinner for Gene Kelly, Sammy told the story of their first meeting and the bet that started it all. "Gene Kelly taught me something in those 4 days that I've never forgotten," Sammy said, his voice thick with emotion. "He taught me that real artists don't tear each other down to build themselves up. Real artists make each other better." We went into that studio as competitors and came out as collaborators. And in the process, we created something neither of us could have created alone. Gene, sitting at the head table, had tears in his eyes. After Sammy's speech, he stood up and said, "Sammy Davis Jr. is the greatest natural talent I've ever worked with. And that dance we did in 1958? People ask me all the time if we ever decided who won the bet. The truth is, we both lost the bet. Because the bet was about who could outdance who. And what we discovered was that the question was wrong. Dancing isn't about beating someone. It's about finding your equal and seeing how high you can both fly." The footage of that 1958 duet is still used in dance schools today. Teachers show it to students and say, "This is what happens when ego becomes collaboration. This is what happens when competition becomes art. This is what happens when two masters decide that making each other better is more important than being the best." Gene Kelly died in 1996. Sammy had died 6 years earlier in 1990. But that 7-minute dance they created in 1958 outlived them both. It's been viewed millions of times online. It's been analyzed by scholars. It's been attempted by dancers who can't quite capture the magic, because the magic wasn't just in the steps. It was in two men deciding that the best way to win was to make sure they both won. If this story of how competition became collaboration and ego became art moved you, like and subscribe for more stories about legends who understood that greatness isn't about being better than others. It's about making everyone around you better too. Share this with someone who needs to understand that the best victories are the ones where everybody wins. Have you ever had a rival become a friend? Have you ever competed with someone and discovered you were better together than apart? Tell us in the comments. Hit that notification bell because these stories about the transformative power of mutual respect are what we need more of in the world right now.